QSO Today, episode 352, Tom Tate WA7NPX. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by Icom America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that the great outdoors is still calling. Get outside and under the stars with the new Icom IC705 all-band portable transceiver, now shipping from your favorite amateur radio dealer. And by LDG Electronics, whose desktop antenna tuners are perfect for your ham shack or mobile. My thanks to Icom America and LDG Electronics for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Just a reminder that speaker applications are open for the next QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo coming in August. If you have a presentation on a technology or project that you're working on and wish to share it with thousands of your ham radio buddies, go to the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo website and apply. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Tate, your host. Tom Tate, WA7NPX, began his ham radio journey with his best friend in middle school. Amateur radio can make lifelong buddies as well as develop practical and professional skills for life. WA7NPX shares his ham radio story and how it can serve as a springboard for developing expertise in other hobbies as well. WA7NPX, this is Eric 4Z1UG. Are you there, Tom?
Yeah, I'm here, Eric.
Tom, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, about in, I think it was 1966, a friend of mine, Jack Reed, who later became WA7LNW, got himself a Night Kits Star Roamer shortwave receiver kit. And that started our adventure. You know, we took a whole spool of enamel wire and strung it between two uprights on top of his antenna. And we started hearing shortwave stations. And then things after that progressed. You know, we heard about QSL cards, shortwave listening QSL cards, and we got those, and that got exciting. And then Jack got to talking to somebody at school, found out that one of his classmates, Ron Schmidley, WA7NAH later, his dad was K7SVY, and he could give us the novice test. So that really got us pumped up.
So we have to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because it seems to me that for you and Jack to have an interest in a Star Roamer meant that you might have had an interest in electronics or electricity even before that.
Yeah, that's true. We were, in our church, we were the audio visual type people. We did, you know, the PA systems for the church, and then we did intercoms between here and there. You know, we were into electronics beforehand, yeah.
And how did that start? Because you were friends and you kind of had this mutual interest, or was there something that kind of ignited that interest?
We both played band in our church, and so, you know, we both played instruments, and we sat next to each other. It just kind of grew there. It was a friendship that's lifelong. It still goes today.
And what was the hometown?
This was in Phoenix, Arizona.
And you and Jack first got that night Star Roamer. I'm assuming it was at Jack's house, or did you have a way of moving it between the two houses?
No, it was his. I think his dad gave it to him or something like that. But he was always getting new equipment.
How old were you at that time?
We were in middle school, so we were 7th and 8th grade, whatever that works out to.
So you're these middle schoolers, you have this night Star Roamer, you're listening to shortwave radio, you find a mentor that gives you the novice exam. How old were you when you got your first novice license, and what was the call sign?
Okay, WN7NPX, of course, and that would be back in around 1969. I think that puts me around 16 or 17. I can't remember exact dates there.
Now, in those days, almost every high school, it seemed, especially in a city like Phoenix, might actually have an amateur radio club at the school. Did yours?
Well, we didn't, actually. We had the equipment stashed in the back room. We got to talking with our electronics teacher, but this was after we already had our licenses. And we did reactivate South Mountain High School Amateur Radio Club.
And were you able to convince your teacher that maybe he should become a ham?
I'm not sure we ever did that, but he was very supportive of us. And, you know, he let us spend a lot of extra hours there. You know, during empty periods, we would come into the electronics class if it was open, and he'd let us do just about whatever we wanted.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Oh, absolutely. Because of the electronics at that point, when we got our licenses and everything, it caused me to really strongly think about electronics as a career choice. At that point, I had already learned how to be a professional printer, being able to work in print shops and do everything from the beginning to the very end in print shops. And I was really ready to be a journeyman printer. But then electronics came along, into my life, and it built me to the point where in middle school, they asked us, actually, it was in eighth grade, they were asking us to look at career choices. And I looked at the numbers of electronic technicians and electronic engineers were needed in the future. And I just knew that had to be where I was going to go, because that was so much more exciting. Radio was just what I was interested in. And it turned out I didn't go down the radio path. I ended up going down digital path because that was what was offered in my high school for vocational opportunities. And so that's kind of what drove me to beginning. And amateur radio has been part of my life throughout. And I've called on my amateur radio many times throughout my career.
I think it's interesting to point out here, because I think maybe public schools are very different today than they were then. But I also remember being asked what a career choice I might make in junior high school for kind of setting the course for high school. And a lot of high schools, at least in the West, I grew up in California, they had huge industrial arts complexes that were part of the high schools that included, as you say, print shops and electronic shops and auto shops and things like that. I don't know if those exist anymore, but back in those days, that seemed to be, in eighth grade, you could make a career choice.
Yeah, I heard that our vocational program had shut down in Phoenix recently also. It was Phoenix Union High School district. They had the vocational school, and we actually bussed up. I spent half the day in vocational classes, smelling the bread from the people that were learning to bake down the hall, while we were learning electronics. And it was a real experience.
It was quite amazing. That's what I remember as well, being in public school in California. Okay, so here you are. You're close to graduating from South Mountain High School. What happened after that?
It was right at about the time of graduation where my family moved to Israel. My dad is an airline pilot, and so he moved all over the world. But our church asked us to have a presence in Israel. So we moved there, and I began my life over there. I went to the Hebrew school to learn how to speak Hebrew, and then I got jobs as a printer until I finally found a nice job in electronics that was down there at one of the kibbutzim. And, that's where it took off.
So Israel was very different. This must be 1970, 1971, something like that, early 70s?
That's right. It was 1970, October.
It was almost a third world country, probably, in those days. A second world country?
Absolutely. It was so exciting to be in a country that was so new. And especially when I, used my WN7NPX/4x4 call and I was suddenly the DX, and I was being called at 5 words a minute in CW. It was really a thrill. But then to deal with all these new people that I'd never met before and the new cultures, and it was a real growing experience for a young lad.
And you enjoyed it, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I stayed there and ended up staying there until 1979.
You're working in a print shop. What kind of electronics job did you find up there?
Well, about that, while I was completing doing the print shop, I also was completing my correspondence school with DeVry. It was actually Bell and Howell Correspondence Schools that was owned by DeVry. And I completed that. And when I completed that, then I got a job in Sepharad Applied Irradiation, which is where we were doing some nuclear type of nuclear medicine sensors. And that was an exciting job. I was working with cryogenic fluids and things like that. And after that career, then I went on to Jerusalem. We moved to Jerusalem a little later. And then I went to work at at Boys Town, Jerusalem. And I was I guess you call it the chief technician for the school there. We actually had an amateur radio club that I started up there while I was there. And if you look at that building, the very top of it is all glassed in. That's where the amateur radio station was. And that was really kind of cool because you can look out the windows while you're talking to other people and have a lot of fun.
It must have been an amazing antenna location.
Yeah, it did. But we didn't, at the time I was there, we didn't have real good antennas. We just had some wires up there, but still we had pretty good propagation.
It's my understanding that you were also here during the 73 war. What was that like?
That was pretty exciting. I had my headphones on and I was talking to someone at the consulate up in Germany at the time. And the guy tells me that he's hearing a thumping sound coming out of my fan that I had on top of my Tempo 1. And I couldn't figure out what it was. So, I took my headphones on, listened for it, couldn't hear anything. I told him I didn't hear anything. He says, yeah, it's happening again and again. And I finally, was just going on trying to figure out where this thumping noise was coming from because I thought it was this little muffin fan. It turned out it was the tank battle that was happening across the Sea of Galilee on the other side of the Canara. You could hear and see the tanks that were actually in the battle. And then the air raid sirens went off. And that's when we knew exactly what was going on. I told them I had to QRT.
That was a whole tank battalion of Syrians coming across the Golan Heights, being held off, I think, by a very small number of Israeli tanks.
Yeah, some of my friends were in those tanks. And they told me later about the battles they had. It was pretty exciting. I did get to go up on to the front lines there and get to see it up close and personal. That was pretty exciting also.
Did you play some kind of role, a support role? Were you drafted to, at least, you weren't a citizen, but were you drafted to help out?
No, I'm not a Jewish and I'm not, I wasn't a citizen. So the only thing we could do was just play music for the troops. So we did that. We went in the evenings and we just drove up there in convoy style, behind the tanks. I was driving an Oldsmobile and had to be careful that I actually smashed the accelerator as soon as they started that tank up. Otherwise, he was coming right over the top of me. And we did go up there and we played for the troops and drank coffee that was straight out of a Syrian tank, that kind of thing. It was an exciting time.
You spent your time in Israel. Then what happened after that?
After 1979, actually it was in January 79, we decided it was time to come back to the United States. By that time, I'd married my wife, and we came back to Oregon, and I tried to get situated into amateur radio up in the Pacific Northwest, and I met a few of the fellows, but eventually I ended up rotating back down to Arizona and got started up there with Central Arizona DX Club, and I was back with Jack Reed and my other friends.
What were you doing professionally?
Professionally, I went to work for, I started key to disk systems maintenance in IT. Professionally, an electronics technician at that point. And I worked my way up into working on the mainframes. I worked on the mainframe that actually created the Star Wars shows. All the fight scenes in that, I was working on the hard drives for those. I became one of the best hard drive technicians.
So this is something I've never heard before. Talk a little bit about that.
Key to disk, data processing, where the operators would sit in front of the terminals and key away, and then that would go to a disk, and then that would pull a tape, and then you'd take that to the mainframe to run it on the mainframe, because that was when we still had the 360s, IBM 360s and whatnot. And so that was where I really cut my teeth and really got going in electronics. And then I became a more and more of a support role till eventually I joined United Airlines and became a terminal maintainer, they called it, where I took care of all sorts of equipment and eventually trained up and worked on the AIX processors, the bigger computers that are in data centers. And I began doing IT, and eventually I became a trainer for United Airlines. And that's where I really enjoyed myself the most, working with people from around the world on phone, unfortunately, not by radio, but I was helping folks all over the world with all their electronics problems. And that was exciting.
You mentioned earlier the Tempo 1. The Henry Radio Tempo 1 was the first ham radio that I think I had ever seen in my life. How did you come to acquire the Tempo 1?
Jack Reed actually sent it to me, WA7LNW. He was supporting me the whole time I was in Israel. So when he had a chance to get that to me, he sent me one. And that was really great because up to that point, all I had was a little 10-tech QRP rig. And by then, when he had sent that to me, I had already graduated into being in a general class because of the conditional class license. That when they made that change from novice to conditional, then I was able to move forward with my amateur radio career that way.
Right, because you were out of the country. In a way, you were able to get the conditional license because you couldn't go to a FCC field office to take the test.
That's right.
But in order to take the test, though, did you have to have either supervision or mentorship or something like that from anybody in Israel in order to give you that test?
Actually, I did. I do not remember the fellow's name. I'm sad about that. There was a fellow down in Beersheba.
American.
Yeah, an American that was able to administer the test to me, and he helped me through that, and I got it all squared away.
And now this message from Icom America. I can already feel spring in the air, and the great outdoors is calling. Get outside under the stars with one of Icom's ultimate SDR transceivers. Stay connected while off the grid. The Icom IC705 is the perfect transceiver for hams who enjoy both a great indoors and outdoors. It's the perfect QRP companion with base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters, and is weighing in at just under 2 pounds. These features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall, 5 watts with a BP272 battery pack, or 10 watts with an external 13.8 DC power supply. Single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions, a micro USB connector, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, and an SD card slot. Integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger. The HM243 speaker microphone is standard equipment. The basic accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations or a day social distancing in the park. Visit the IC705 webpage to view accessories and free software available for download. If you lean to the VHF and above region, then you can create your own band opening with the Icom IC9700. This transceiver radio brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy. These features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD with real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. I believe it is the most exciting VHF and above transceiver on the market today. And finally, the Icom IC7300 is the most advanced HF transceiver in its price class and ideal for the new ham or the experienced ham looking for an upgrade. The Icom IC7300's high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages to reduce the generated inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 is the radio that changed the way entry-level HF is designed, and I own one, and I think it's brilliant. Its features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. The real HF fun starts at Icom. Be sure to buy one of these fine Icom transceivers at your favorite ham radio dealer, and when you do it, tell them that you heard about it here at QSO Today. And now, back to our QSO. So it sounds to me like you spent the rest of your career with United Airlines?
Yeah, until I finally was retired from United Airlines and moved on to banking. Then I became a project manager for Bank of America.
Are you still working, or are you retired?
I'm retired now. So now I get to play radio as often as I want.
Now, I'm curious, what's the favorite modes that you like to operate?
I like to play a lot with the digital modes. It's really all the modes are fun. It's like I like contesting a lot. I really love field day. It's just the digital modes, they have a special intrigue to me because of the fact that my career has always been about digital electronics. And that's what the digital modes are. So I'm pulled towards it. It's like, well, what is this? And how are they doing it? And what's the new design? I'm always waiting for the newest thing to come out so I can explore it and play with it a little bit.
So that means that when you returned to America, if you liked digital modes, did you actually operate RTTY?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Jack and I got us our little RTTY scopes. We took some old Heathcote scopes, and I went in there and I put some capacitors in there so we get more of a vertical line instead of this oblong circle that we would get. And, we were off and running with that. We enjoyed it.
Did you use teletypes or anything like that? How were you sending and receiving RTTY?
Actually, we were hooking up to the computers and running it from the computers.
Really?
Yeah, we didn't use teletype. Yeah, it was that far along that we were able to do it. I think that was in the late 80s.
You're right. We would have computers by then. So you operate RTTY. You now operate the Joe Taylor modes like JT4, JT8, FT8, things like that.
Yeah, I love FT8. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Are you a DXer?
I am a DXer. I love chasing DX. It's a lot of fun.
And how have you done on DX?
I'm not too bad. I'd like to spend more time on it, but there's something in the way. My problem has been antennas. It seems like most of the time I've been on small urban lots, so I don't have a chance to put up a really good DX antenna. Although lately I've been able to get my verticals going with a lot of radials, and I've been able to put out a nice FT8 signal and be able to pick up on the other side pretty good.
Your QRZ page shows a cubical quad.
Yeah, I love that cube quad. That is a real nice one. That is the Cubex quad, actually.
So now, at least where you're working now, you have a quad and the verticals.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm using right now.
Do you have DXCC? Do you have 100 countries?
I believe I do. I think I'm beyond that. I don't think I'm up to 5-band yet, but, if I was to work at it, I probably could. I just don't work. I don't really chase DX as much as I probably should have, the way I would really like to get the 5-band. It's just a relaxed hobby for me to do that. I don't want to work at it. I want it to be fun. So that's where I kind of focus my attention is towards the fun factor.
Do you work contests?
I do work contests. We like to play in the field day. Jack and I like to get together with that and do field day together. Then I'll play on the RTTY contests, and I tried a few of the other contests.
Do you have a favorite?
I would have to say field day is my favorite, even though it's not really a contest.
And field day in Phoenix is actually pretty warm, I would think.
Well, actually, I've been going to, and you'll see on the pictures that are on my QRZ page, that I've been going to southern Utah, to Hurricane Mesa, where Jack is working. And we have a nice facility up there on top of one of the mesas, and it's really nice. And he's got I think a 100-foot tower up there.
What's the current rig?
The current rig is a Yaesu FTDX 5000. That is the best radio I've ever owned.
And why is that?
Oh, it's got, 2 full receivers on it. It's got all the filtering you could want. And I've got it hooked up to the computer 6 ways from Sunday. Plus, I've got the data management unit on it. So I can see in the scopes, I can see all the different waterfalls and everything. I can see exactly what's going on at any moment and adjust to match whatever the conditions are.
Can you operate SO2R with that rig?
You probably could. I have never tried it. To me, that looks like too much work. I know that other guys just love it and they have a lot of fun with it, but it's just not for me.
Well, I think you have to get in the zone to be a SO2R operator.
Yeah, I think so.
So you have the FTDX 5000. Do you have anything that you take into the field with you?
I've got my daughter's FT817. I like that one. I'm going to try to activate this summer to do some of the POTA, Parks on the Air, and see if that'll get out at all. I've got myself a few antennas that I'm going to take with me. I've got the little Tar Heel 2 on top of the truck, and I've got my RV. So, I'm ready, set to go.
You mentioned before we started that you like to experiment and build. What's the project on your workbench today?
Oh, I just restored what is this? An Icom 730. And I did that for WA6BLF. He's been off the air for years and years, and he brought his radio over to me to restore it and get it back going for him. And that was a lot of fun, finding the old Molex pins that had been swaged out that needed to be fixed, and capacitors, check and make sure they weren't leaky and whatnot. But I got the thing yesterday. I got it completed. So that's my latest project I finished.
Have you done a lot of restoration?
Yeah. And if you look at the bottom of my QRZ page, you'll see the console that I built out of angle iron and everything to build this console for all my radios. And in the right-hand side, you'll see a great big boat anchor. It's a giant gray Hammerland, I believe it is, sitting there. Either Hallicraft or Hammerland. I can't remember which. I don't have the picture in front of me right now, but that was a raffle item that I got in Tel Aviv that had been setting in all kinds of water and things, and I had to restore that. I took the faceplate entirely off, ground it down with sandpaper, and then put white crayon into each of the places where the lettering was, because it was all embossed in there. That was a lot of work. But after about a couple of months, I finally got that thing up on the air, and it was really nice hearing with that machine.
What's the most exotic piece of test equipment on your bench?
I'm not really into very much on my test bench. Yeah, I've got oscilloscopes, I've got my frequency meters, my power, my soldering irons. I'm really not into the esoteric type stuff at all. I mean, the most esoteric thing that I might have would be the Rig Expert, antenna analyzer, I guess.
Do you use the Rig Expert as a signal generator then, if you're working on like the IC730?
Sure. Yeah, I would use that to kick up a signal so I can read it, see if it's right on the, that kind of thing. It's good for tuning.
I actually had never thought to use the SWR meter as a signal generator, but it seems to me that for a small signal to peak a receiver, you can do that.
Yeah, or you can use another transmitter, but it's easier to use that.
When you mentioned that you do some other kind of experiments, what kind of experiments do you like to do in amateur radio?
I like playing with the antennas. I bought myself the buddy pole just specifically, not because I needed it, but I wanted the extended buddy pole system just so I could play with all the different configurations and see the efficiencies. And that was really amazing once I did that, to just see just how inefficient you could be and still get out. But when you make it efficient, it's, oh my gosh, different.
Do you have a 3D printer?
I do have a 3D printer, and I make things for amateur radio for that.
How did you get into 3D printing?
My daughter.
Your daughter, apparently she's a ham, and she seems to persuade you in directions that you pursue then.
Yeah, she does. I get a lot of her handoff stuff because she's a professional in electronics also. She works for a worldwide corporation in the research and development department. So they use 3D printers all the time. And so she's like, hey, Dad, you should get one of these, And so I got into it, and then I started learning how to use the 3D, I guess CAD-CAM packages.
What's your favorite?
Fusion 360. I love it. She likes Shapeways and some of the other ones. I don't. I like, the good old-fashioned AutoCAD stuff, and that works for me.
So you use Fusion 360 as your CAD software. And what kind of 3D printer do you have?
I have the Prusa i3 Mark III S. So that is a really solid printer for a beginner in 3D.
And what have you created with your 3D printer? The reason I'm asking, Tom, is that at the last QSO, Today Virtual Ham Expo, the most frequently watched video was on 3D printing, which kind of surprised me, actually. I would have thought that amateur radio subjects, but apparently the idea of using 3D printers in amateur radio is actually quite a popular idea.
Well, let's see. One of the first things I made was the soft rock enclosure for the soft rock. It's really nice, a nice little box that I can screw together. I can take it apart. I can modify. And then I've made all kinds of feet for my different transmitters. Sometimes that tilt bail that they put underneath there, they just don't lift it high enough from when you're sitting really close to your radio. You're looking down, you're getting the parallax on the needles and stuff. So I'll build extra. I used to use wood at one time. Now I do everything 3D.
Do you find that when you're doing a radio restoration that there might be a piece of hardware that you just can't get that you'll make with a 3D printer?
Yeah, I've made different brackets, and things like that. That it's faster to draw up a bracket than it is to try to go out and find a piece of plastic and cut it down and make it fit. But nowadays you can even make the things for your antennas, like the fiberglass poles. You might want to put an antenna at the very tip of your fiberglass pole. Well, you can just 3D print a little plastic thing that would fit exactly over the pole and hold your antenna wires just exactly, or you can use your guys and things like that.
Let me take a quick break to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, and that's the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and it now includes Michael Walker, VA3MW, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. The group documents their projects and makes circuit boards available to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Jeremy may complain about the overall length of the podcast, but friends, let me tell you that I could listen to it all day, and that's good. Even if you are a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George, Jeremy, and Mike now for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast on every podcast player. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO today. Now, it's my understanding that some of this plastic that's used in these 3D printers don't like to be outside in the sunlight. It seems to me like a place like Phoenix, the sun would be especially difficult. What kind of material do you use in that case for outside stuff?
ABS is the one for outdoors. A lot of people use that because that's a much higher temperature. On these things, you can go clear up to nylon and work on really high temperature stuff. It's like, I don't like to do it. The best I use is ABS. It's quite robust outside. I've even 3D printed a 3-jaw chuck for my wood lathe, and it holds together at high speeds.
Let me ask a question, because I think for some of us that are thinking, I have a 3D printer here that I'm just beginning to start to understand, but it seems to me that the barrier to entry may be mastering software like the Fusion 360 that you're using. What advice would you give to somebody that wants to take on 3D printing? What's the best way for them to learn, like a software package like Fusion 360?
I would say to go get some of the videos, the YouTube videos that explain how to use each of those packages. There's some that are easier than others. Fusion 360 is probably one of the hardest ones to use. And I only got good at it because I just started following step by step and reproducing exactly what was being done in the video myself, and then trying to modify what was being displayed on the YouTube video. I would try to change it a little bit so I really made sure that I understood the concepts. And it's just diligence. You just got to get in there and just try it. You just got to keep going over and over and over. And then once you have a working and finished model, then you send that to the printer and try to print it. Only then send it to the printer.
Right. It could take hours to print something.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you're going to print. I printed, about 64 items the other day. It took me 8 hours to print it. It was 64 little stanchions for a boat that a friend of mine needed, little tiny pieces. So it depends on what you're printing is how in-depth and how long it takes to print it.
Now, do you find that there's a large amount of libraries or reference stuff online? So if you're wanting to make like those stanchions, for example, is there a place to go where you actually might get some ideas on design, or maybe those things have already been designed?
Yeah, there's a lot of places online. You just look for 3D printing and you'll find all kinds of different sites where people are sharing their designs. Prusa has their site. I would actually recommend people go to Prusa first before they go to Thingiverse, because everything there is curated a little bit better, and you can trust most of the things that are out there to print properly on your printer.
If you were going to estimate how many hours you've got into mastering and, say, getting to the first level of feeling like you actually know what you're doing, how many hours do you think you have invested in learning to be a 3D printer operator?
I don't really think that my experience is really a good gauge to measure, because I started out with a very badly designed printer before we got the Prusa. And that machine, I spent years on it trying to get it to print properly, and it was just failing constantly. Turned out it was design flaws in the printer. Once I got the Prusa, I was up and running and printing within the first hour after I'd completed putting the kit together. It was that easy.
Is there like a test program inside the Prusa that allows you to print something?
Well, on Prusa's site, he has all kinds of things that you can download and then just try to print. As your first
printing thing.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you have the SoftRock, and the SoftRock is one of the first software-defined radio kits out there. Are you into software-defined radio?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I use the Win4Yaesu package connected up to the FTDX 5000, and I've got the LP-PAN 2 attached to that, so that I can see this whole spectrum there. I really like being able to see the spectrum, being able to move across and quickly change frequencies and go directly to the signal that I want. And then the addition to that, because I'm using the Win4Yaesu, I can share the COM ports, and that means that I can go and fire up N1MM, or I can run CW Skimmer. With CW Skimmer, that package, I've always wanted to be able to just see a signal and then click on it and go right to it. And now I can.
How are you using the SoftRock then?
The SoftRock has been just sitting here waiting for me to go out into the field.
That's part of your field radio setup.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, I want to see how good this little thing will work.
So while the FT817 doesn't have a waterfall display, I guess you could take the SoftRock out with a tablet or something like that and use that as a waterfall display.
Yeah, actually, being in computers, I got so many extra computers. It's no big deal for me to take a couple of laptops.
It seems to me that your ham radio life and the choices that you've made in your career actually have affected your family. How has your family taken to amateur radio?
They are very supportive. My family throughout my whole career is always understood that, no, we can't buy that house in the HOA because of the fact that we have antenna restrictions. And no, that's not a north-facing hill, that it's going to restrict propagation and whatnot. So they've supported me all along, and they all understand it. And I think, situations, that have occurred, like I've been able to help there was a wildfire in the Phoenix area one time. It was just north of town. Firefighters got trapped by this wildfire, and I was just listening on the handy talkie, and here comes somebody saying that they needed help and could I make a phone call for them. And just that little tiny thing, I think the family understood just how important amateur radio is. And then when Kuwait occurred, where the invasion of Kuwait occurred, remember that was also hams that let the world know about that.
The first Gulf War, right.
Yeah, right. And so my family was aware of all of these things because of the fact of my involvement with it. And so every time there's a hurricane or something like that, like what happened down in Puerto Rico, that my kids and my wife, they're always listening. It's like, have you heard anything? Is the bands being restricted or anything like that?
Now, besides your daughter, have any of the other family members become hams?
Yeah, my daughter and my wife actually got their calls as a birthday present to me. I did not even know they were studying, but one day they came home, with their their call signs, and I was all surprised.
Now, is your wife active?
Not as much as I'd like her to be. We use the handy talkies a few times. I try to keep talking her into getting her general class so we can do some contesting together. And she doesn't really have the interest.
Are you active in the local ARES?
No, I'm not actually. I'm handicapped, so trying to do very much as far as Aries goes is, it would be a struggle for me. Just getting out there and getting into bad situations, that's not much I can do. So I'll be a behind the scenes support person maybe.
Are you active in amateur radio clubs there?
I've been to the amateur radio clubs where we're living now. We've only been here about 6 years, and I've been to the club meeting once. So, and that was on field day. And because it was field day, I actually left and said, hi guys, I got to go home and get on.
So when you Google Tom Tate, WA7NPX, the other thing that comes up is that you're a model railroad builder. How did you get into model railroading?
I'm not entirely sure. I went with the family to a model train museum here in Washington, Missouri. It's just southwest of St. Louis. And we were looking around at the just for something to do on a weekend, and went in there and saw this model train museum, and it intrigued me. And then I found out about the fact that they were doing digital command and control of the trains. And so that set me off. When they heard the word digital, I just had to get involved. And so now I volunteer there. I'm actually teaching people how to use that. It's been a couple of years now. I've been doing that for a while now.
Okay, and what kind of layout do you have? You mentioned that you have a wood shop, you have a wood lathe, and you have the 3D printer. It seems to me that a guy like you with this kind of stuff would actually have a pretty decent layout.
I did, but then I took it apart. I had just a 4x8, and it was all HO scale, but I took it all apart because as a volunteer, I get to play with these layouts that are 30 and 40 feet long. And it's a lot of fun, a lot more fun than playing with mine at home because I can do a lot more with it there. And lately we're doing automation where we're actually letting the computer drive the trains around and decide which routes to take and everything. And it's a lot more fun than what I could do at home.
So you mentioned that there's a digital control of the trains. When I was a kid, the way that you controlled the train is you actually applied voltage to the tracks. What's different now?
Well, that's funny you should ask. In the class that I gave on Saturday, I actually took my old original straight key and I hooked it up to a 9-volt battery and a muffin fan. And I showed the guys how if you pulsed the battery to the fan, that the fan will turn. And then I showed them how if I kept pulsing it in certain patterns, I could actually send code. And so I sent them SOS. And everybody's like, I didn't tell them what it was I was doing. I was just doing SOS. And they, hey, you're sending SOS. It's like, yeah, I'm sending SOS. And so I explained to them how you can get power across the rails along with a coded signal that then a decoder inside the locomotive could understand it. And so that kind of tied amateur radio in.
So you're actually sending some kind of modulated signal on the track itself with the DC?
Yeah, it's a bipolar signal is what it is. It's a digital signal that you're sending in addition to the power. You're sending full power, and it's just a square wave. It's National Model Railroad Association. It actually has defined all the standards, and so then these computers, actually, they're little Atmel type of controllers. Will generate that signal, and depending on what you do on your controller, the handheld controller that's used. I actually use my cell phone to control it.
This is fascinating because I actually didn't realize that things had gotten this sophisticated in model railroading. But does that mean that anything that's along the track, like signals and gates and things like that, are also controlled the same way?
Yes, they are. Yeah, you can put a decoder in virtually anything and just look for that signal. And you know how we have Ethernet now? Well, they have something similar to it. They call it LocoNet. And they actually send the signals in addition to having the signals go down the rails. They send it on this LocoNet. So then that can be hooked up to all these stationary decoders. And then you can control crossings and, flashing lights. You can have different things, and you use Arduinos throughout, it's, the opportunities are endless for animation.
Do you think that this is a good parallel hobby for amateur radio operators who maybe think they need a little bit more than just this? And do you think this is potentially could be complementary to amateur radio in some way?
Possibly. It's, if you're into electronics, if you're deep into electronics, it could be complementary. But I wouldn't really say that it's too much. It's, there are some people that are using radio control for garden style trains and that kind of thing, but it's not even that.
And when you say garden style, a garden gauge is quite a large train, right? Almost like a child's scooter size train.
No, that's a little too large. Yeah, I'm talking about, it's about a 3-inch rail, or 2.5 to 3-inch rail. I can't remember exactly what the scale is, but it can go on out in your yard. And some people are using radio control to do that, rather than using electrified rails throughout your yard.
It might be a hazard to the dogs and cats that live there.
Yeah, there's lots of YouTube videos on that. You can see those out there.
And now this message from LDG Electronics. LDG Electronics, our new sponsor, is a family-owned company that manufactures sophisticated antenna tuners, baluns, and antenna accessories. Check out their new Z100A antenna tuner for your shack or portable operation that includes LDG's famous 10-to-1 tuning and plug-and-play operation. For more information, click on the banner in this week's show notes page. And when you make your LDG purchase, tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. What do you see as the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now?
I would say the greatest challenge right now for us is relevance. Amateur radio seems to be under attack as far as I'm concerned. It looks to me, I keep seeing things that bother me, such as the latest directives from the FCC here in the U.S., saying that we shouldn't commit any crimes with radio. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? It's like Part 97 already says we're not supposed to do these things. And then they came out with the latest thing was that they're wanting to, well, at any rate, to not make a long story short, it looks like the government entities are starting to look at that spectrum as valuable space that they can auction off. And so we've got to stay relevant to our leaders in our countries. I know there in Israel, you had a problem with the 2 gigahertz spectrum is going to be auctioned off, I guess.
Well, I think the 3 gigahertz spectrum.
3?
Yeah. But you're right. If you don't use it, we lose it.
Exactly.
And even if you're using it, you may lose it.
Right. So it's a perception that needs to be brought about, to our governmental leaders. They need to understand that, when a hurricane occurs, and those cell towers go down, there's got to be somebody there to fill the gap, and when a dictator takes over a country and starts telling everybody one thing, but then the ham operator gets on the air and tells them something totally different, then, there's a relevance there that we need to keep, we need to keep that. If, I just don't know how to explain it any better than that.
I think you did a great job. I think there's a sense of needing to over-regulate on the one hand, and then obviously the big corporate communications interests can't get enough spectrum. I always like to say it's kind of like the 405 freeway in Los Angeles. It just can't get any wider, but then they keep making it wider and it's still full, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there is the other aspect of it, and that is that when they do take a bit of spectrum away from us, what does that leave us to do? Well, we take whatever spectrum's left and we keep exploring new opportunities with it. Joe Taylor is doing his thing, with the spectrum that we have. And now we can do FT8 in the space of one voice. We can have all kinds of people talking in one space, and the same thing with the microwave frequencies. Those guys are out there. I'm not into microwave, but I know the guys are out there experimenting with that all the time. AA7A, he was talking to the moon, a long time ago, Ned Stearns was. We've got to keep that spark going.
I think there's even been some compromise. Maybe I just read something that perhaps when we thought that the entire 3 gigahertz band for amateurs in America was going to be taken away, that it appears that they've kind of relinquished a little bit left so that all these Arden networks that are running, they don't necessarily have to throw out the 3 gig equipment. They can actually continue to operate, maybe with less bandwidth, but they're still there.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that we don't have as much exposure at the commissioner level in the FCC, for instance. We used to have Riley Hollingsworth, and now we don't have that exposure that we used to have. And perhaps that's what's, driving some of these questions, some of these, I don't want to say the word, but I'm going to say it anyway, bureaucrats, are making decisions that are detrimental to the hobby, and they don't even understand why.
Well, I guess that means that we just have to do a better job educating our friends and neighbors. It's funny, I'm sure this happens to you as well, but when somebody comes into my office and they see the ham radio gear, or they say I'm an amateur radio operator, there's either this look of bewilderment, usually in young people, but for old people, they'll say, people are still doing that?
Exactly. I had that happen to me just last week. Someone said that to me. They said, "Oh, do people still do that?" And I was rocked back on my heels. It's like, yeah, we're still doing it.
What's so amazing is that we're even kind of a growing community, and yet for some reason we're not out there enough. Or it seems to me in North America there tends to be a lot of natural disasters and opportunities for hams to show themselves, but for some reason we're just not getting in the press.
Well, I'm beginning to think that maybe POTA is going to step in there and do something for us. That seems kind of exciting at this point to me. I've been watching them, and they are, there's a lot of people going out there. They just get their ticket, and they're just excited to go out and do an activation of a park. And so that, they're asking questions on the Facebook pages all the time, about what antenna should I take? What battery should I take? And so that I'm seeing that enthusiasm start up, and I'm hoping that will translate into more people getting their tickets.
Well, I think what's funny about that, because I went with a group last Friday to do an activation out in the hills above Jerusalem.
Oh, nice.
The noise floor in neighborhoods now is so high because of televisions and switching supplies and chargers and things like this, that it's almost like part of your natural tendency now is to take a radio into the field just so that you can get into a place where there's no noise so that you can operate. So maybe all of this technology that we're surrounded with is going to get us out into the public, and people will actually see us operating and answering questions.
I think that's a good perspective. It's like we've been huddled over our hot radio tubes and everything else for so many years. It's time we need to get out of the basement and get out there and start being exposed to everybody. Ham radios, field day is a great opportunity, but it's not enough. Just one time a year is not enough. And POTA may be able to do a little bit more.
And when you say POTA, you're saying Parks on the Air?
Yes, Parks on the Air.
So let's say, for example, that you actually have somebody that is now showing an interest in amateur radio. What advice would you give them as a new operator?
As a new operator, if they've already got their license, I would say the most important thing for them to do is get on the air. Whatever it takes, don't look for the ultimate radio, get what you can afford, and then just get on the air and don't be bashful. As for years, I was that mic fright type person. I just could not say anything on the radio. I would listen for the DX station. He'd be making his call, and then I'd hear him, he would stop, and it would my turn to go, and I would just hesitate over pressing that key or pressing the mic, and I would just let the opportunity slip by. And it was like, don't do that. It's a hobby. We're out there to have fun. If you mess up, we'll forgive you. Just get out there and have some fun. That's why you joined this hobby in the first place. That's what I would say.
And while we know that there are some turkeys out there, every community has some turkeys. The majority of the people I've met in ham radio are absolutely really nice people. As a result of that, they're quite forgiving if you make a mistake on the air.
Absolutely. And don't hesitate to send QRS, go slow, if you're doing CW, people will slow down for you. The vast majority of them will. Some won't, but most will.
Tom, it's such a pleasure to have you on the QSO Today podcast. I want to thank you for joining me and wish you 73.
All right, 73s, Eric.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Tom. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WA7NPX in the search box at the top of the page.